Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi, Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, on this episode, we will be talking, an MLS review, Geo body language, dancing, McKenny, Gaga, Orlando, can the crew be saved, Pepi's return, and so much more. But first, joining me, as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mossy, a soccer savant and a Fox soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mossy, how are you doing on this Monday, September 19th? And I will add, we come to you from our auxiliary studio. Our studio is being fixed up. It's going to be incredible. So we've moved to a little different type of studio. You can hear us. If you're watching, you can see us. It's still beautiful. We still got wonderful background. How are you, my... Oh, what's on top of your head there?
I am doing well after a fun weekend in Ann Arbor where I purchased this hat that I'm sporting.
It looks beautiful. Congratulations to your Wolverines of Michigan. They continue to run through the field. Who did they beat up on this week?
UConn.
The Huskies of UConn. I didn't even know they had a football team, but congratulations once again. Did you ever see the movie St. Elmo's Fire?
I have.
Rob Lowe's character at one point goes back to college to try to kind of recapture some of the glory. And I just picture you walking in there and everybody screaming and yelling, Mossy, Mossy. Did you go back to some of the old haunts? And was it fun? You look a little tired, buddy.
Yeah, it was an exhausting.
You're paying the price, huh?
Yes. It was a lot of fun, although I must confess, seeing all these young people full of hope with their lives ahead of them does make you think about all the mistakes you made, how disappointing your life has been.
So it was an illuminating type of return back, all right? Well, you're a better person for it. But all in all, fun, right? Any changes happening over there in Ann Arbor?
Yeah. Some of my favorite restaurants have disappeared and others have emerged. You know, the world is constantly evolving.
All right. So you didn't get a chance to watch much then over the days that we haven't talked.
In terms of TV?
Yeah.
No. Tonight, I'm excited. It's the season finale of this show, Industry, on HBO, that I enjoy. It's about finance. I don't understand a word of the finance stuff, but I find it compelling nonetheless. It's kind of Succession meets Euphoria. Also, I got to get caught up on House of the Dragon. Also, a new season of Atlanta has started. I got to watch the first episode of that, so I got a lot to get caught up on.
Lots of work to be done, my friend. I got three things. One, Sins of Our Mother, the Lori Vallow story. It's ripped from the headlines. It happened over the last couple of years. Horrible, horrible story, but an interesting documentary. And we're in the point now where contemporary documentaries, because of the technology age we live in, so much more is now literally documented. And so we have, obviously, police footage that we've never had in the past from documentaries, personal footage. We have all this kind of stuff. So it makes documentaries even more vivid and real because we have all of this. And that's certainly on display in this one. I went back and watched. You ever seen that movie, He's Just Not That Into You? It's a rom-com, if you will.
No, I've never seen that.
It's so good. I thought it was really, really good. And I just bypassed me when it came out. It was relatively popular, and I'm sure some of the folks are behind the cameras or microphones are nodding their heads, either that they've seen it or that they like it. And then there's a new Mark Wahlberg one on Netflix called Father Stew. And I thought it was going to be kind of real religious-y. And there is a huge religious element because it's this guy that starts as a kind of a misfit and a boxer and getting into trouble, and then actually becomes a priest. And so it actually was much better than I thought it was going to be. I came in with very low expectations when it comes to something like that. You ready to light this candle? Because we got all sorts of soccer that has happened this last time we spoke. Yeah,
let's do it.
All right, Mossy, let's take a look at the Western standings over there in MLS because it is heating up. Well, we said all along that it's this musical chairs type of situation, and in, out, up, down, and that is absolutely the case. If you take a look here at the West, Real Salt Lake, I think really we'll talk about the games individually here, but it's going to be real tough for them. Seattle, I think, is out ultimately, and so we're going to see a situation where, for the first time in their history, they're not going to be in the playoffs. And LA Galaxy, who we've so long talked about having games in hand, got a big win and kind of pushed themselves back into contention here. But not everybody's played the same amount of games. So again, as we go through this next round, midweek games, as we get through the international and then the games come, it's going to be really interesting. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with Austin, Nashville, Driussi versus Mukhtar.
Yep.
Both MVP and Golden Boot implications. They both scored in the second half. Mukhtar from the penalty spot. Driussi then equalized minutes later. So Mukhtar is now at 23 goals. Driussi at 21. And Mukhtar, my sense is still the MVP frontrunner coming out of this game. You might recall the last time they played, Mukhtar scored twice. Nashville won 3-0. I felt like Driussi had to have a similar performance this time around to kind of wrestle it back.
Exactly. This was the return, if you will. It was the return. And this was, I think, what people were respecting is this serve and volley type of thing back and forth between these two incredible players who absolutely will be up for the MVP. And I think Driussi had to have a huge game, but more importantly, I think it had to be in the context of them then getting back also from a points perspective as they go into the playoffs here. Because as we know, when it comes to the MVP, it is the regular season that ultimately decides this. But both teams are going to make the playoffs. Who do you think? Well, I think it's probably a simple answer given, but is it without a doubt that Mukhtar is more important to his team than Driussi is to his team? I know that the data shows that, but
it's close. I don't want to sell Driussi short, but I would slightly lean Mukhtar on that, and I would give him the MVP.
You would slightly lean Mukhtar, but if from a defensive and planning type of perspective, if somebody is coming up against Nashville, and you neutralize or shut down Mukhtar, then you got a good chance of winning. In the same way that you do of Driussi, but maybe not as much. So maybe it's much more of a team. And Nashville, I think, and Nashville fans recognize that. They understand that's exactly who they are. It's not going to change anytime going into the playoffs. Nobody's going to step up and be anything close to a Mukhtar. All right, what else?
NYCFC have gotten their mojo back.
Have they?
As we were taping our last podcast, they were facing Atlas in the Campeones Cup. They won that game 2-0. Collins and Maxi Morales with the goals. Another triumph for MLS over Liga MX, for American soccer over Mexican soccer. Unbelievable how one-sided that rivalry.
More silverware for NYCFC and the Pigeons out there in New York.
And then they followed that up by beating the Red Bulls in the derby this past weekend 2-0. Collins and Santi Rodriguez with the goals. So after a terrible few weeks there, NYCFC a couple of nice results back there.
Yeah, both on set pieces in that abomination of a soccer, theater, if you will, that is Yankee Stadium. But they know how to play there, and obviously they got the results. I'm not sure how much of the mojo is back, but I'm still not scared of facing NYCFC in the playoffs in the way that I was a year ago.
And we should say the Red Bulls have already clinched the playoff berth, 13th straight season for them, which is very impressive. NYCFC, not quite yet, but presumably they will be in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I think so.
One team definitely headed to the playoffs, FC Dallas. They clinched this past weekend, 1-1 draw away to San Jose. Paul Arriola sent off late in this one, but it didn't matter. Jesus Ferreira and company headed to the postseason.
Yeah, and as we've said all along, now that they're going to the postseason, they are not only a better team in terms of their first team, but they are more relevant. And I think that in and of itself is a success for a team that, while we all know they hang their hat on development, this is a team that for many years has not been relevant when it comes to the first team. And that's ultimately, I know there's people that love youth development and love all the structures behind the scenes that are going on. I don't care. I've said that before. I want to see it ultimately benefit the first team, which is ultimately what you're selling in terms of season tickets, and that is the pinnacle of your club. I'm not saying that selling players on and going overseas isn't important, but if that's all that you're doing, then I don't think you're giving your customer ultimately what they deserve. And in this case, FC Dallas has given both the customer what they deserve from a first-team perspective and a developmental perspective, and they have changed the way that we now think about FC Dallas. We'll see if that's sustainable.
Montreal 1-0 winners away to New England. Let's do the Montreal part of this first.
Okay.
They're still mathematically alive for the 1 seed in the East, but most likely are going to be number 2. Do you view it as Philadelphia and LAFC are on one tier and Montreal is the best of the rest, or do you put them on that top tier and call it a big 3?
I don't put them on a big 3. Doesn't mean that they can't beat either of the Union or LAFC, but I don't put them on that big 3 yet. And look, when it comes to the Canadian teams and where we are, it's not completely out of sight, out of mind, and they are part of the league. But they do suffer in terms of the visibility and therefore the credibility. I don't think that they necessarily care because they can use it to their advantage. But what Montreal has done this year and what Wilfried Nancy has done this year deserves praise, deserves attention. And ultimately, when they get to the playoffs, I think that's where the attention and possibly the damage that they're going to inflict because of just how good and solid they are is going to manifest.
For New England, very damaging result. Doesn't look like they're going to make the playoffs. Again, the topsy-turvy nature of this league. Supporter Shield, single-season points record 1 year, and then the following year, most likely missing out on the playoffs.
Yeah, and there is an element that has followed Major League Soccer, or that even leadership in Major League Soccer, that will actually point to that as a positive for the league. That is what is desired. That is what is manufactured in that parity that we talk about, in that you can go from first to worst, and you can go the opposite way. And that's part of what is promised when it comes to the league. And Bruce Arena, more than probably anybody, should know that can happen, and you have to guard against it. And those that are able to maintain some consistency, you look at Seattle and others, even Philadelphia Union, with doing less with more, but at least recognizing that because of the salary cap, because of the restrictions, you are going to have to change. They deserve even more credit. So yes, this is I think this is ultimately going to be a failure of the year. And you can say, yeah, but we lost this guy, and we lost this guy, and we lost this guy. Well, you got to be able to restock, or at the very least recognize those changes are coming and be able to adapt, even in a league like MLS.
I mentioned New England won the Shield last season. LAFC with the inside track on winning it this year. They beat Houston 3-1. Carlos Vela on target twice from the penalty spot. I'll tell you about the Philadelphia result in a second, but LAFC and Philadelphia level on points with 2 to play, and LAFC have 2 more wins, so they have the tiebreaker, so it's in their hands.
Look, Vela scoring penalties, but I think in general the team played well. Again, Bale coming off the bench. I thought Chiellini actually was pretty good. Do you see Corey Baird, who's a former LAFC player?
No.
What a goal! What a wonderful touch on the ball over the top. But then he didn't celebrate. I mean, this is it's a little ridiculous at this point, right?
I agree. That's one of your old bugaboos.
But I don't even think at this point, it drives me nuts. I think you're actually being disrespectful and doing a disservice to the game and to your team and ultimately to yourself. I know that you see it as some sort of respect, and this is just not just Corey. But anytime this happens, I don't get it, and maybe I don't feel the affinity and the closeness and the connection to a team where I would even contemplate not celebrating a goal. And again, I just think I don't understand what the calculation is there. You're there as a soccer player. The whole reason why you even have this crazy notion of respect for the team that you are supposedly revering is because you played well and scored goals and actually did your freaking job for them. All right, I digress. Go.
Philadelphia had scored 23 goals in their previous 5 games, but they were finally cooled off by Atlanta, of all teams. 0-0 draw. And frankly, Atlanta should have won this game. It took a great Andre Blake performance to even salvage a point for Philadelphia.
But that is, in essence, it perfectly describes what Philadelphia is. It's collective. We all understand that. But within that collective, you are getting potential MVP performances. And in the moment where it didn't go well for Philadelphia, in the moment where those goals that were just, flowing like wine didn't, and it all dried up, they went back and they relied on, arguably one of the great goalkeepers, certainly in MLS history of the last 10 years, and also a potential MVP. And I'm not talking about best goalkeeper in the league. I'm talking about MVP. It would be hard, especially with what we talked about with what Driussi and those and Mukhtar and those types are doing. Last time it happened was decades ago with Tony Meola, but man, oh man. And it's not as if we don't know that Blake is not just a good goalie, a great goalkeeper that can keep you in the game. And if you're Atlanta, you have to be pulling out your hair because you did everything possible, and they obviously needed those 3 points. So that wasn't good. All right, should we check out the Eastern Conference?
Let's do it.
All right. What jumps out to you first and foremost? Again, we have a race. We have teams that are all blocked up there in the middle, all racing either for positions within the playoffs or literally just to get into the playoffs. We mentioned Atlanta. I think it might be a bridge too far, considering that there are 32 games. Columbus, we'll talk about that. I mean, it's bad from Columbus right now. But you know what's not bad? All right. David Beckham's Inter Miami. My goodness. Sitting there in the playoff spot. Huge win. Where do you want to start when it comes to the East?
Let's start with Columbus. You mentioned it. They hosted Portland, up 1-0. Kevin Molino scored in the first half. They thought they had delivered the dagger with Etienne, but it was ruled out for offsides. And then deep in stoppage time, Santiago Moreno with an equalizer. You could see the anguish look in Caleb Porter's face. This has been an issue for the Crew all season long. -8 goal difference when tied or leading in the 75th minute. And so this one could prove very costly because, as we just saw, they were leapfrogged for that final playoff spot. I'm surprised. I thought when they added Cucho Hernandez, that combination of him and Zelarayan, that Columbus not only would make the playoffs, but would be a dark horse to reach MLS Cup. And all of a sudden, they're on the outside.
Yeah, and then you see Molino coming back, and I mean, scored a great goal, and you think that it's always heading in the right direction, and then the last 15 minutes of the game show up for the Crew. So I don't know if the Crew can be saved from themselves when it comes to what is going on right now. And you mentioned Caleb Porter. There are a lot of Crew fans that aren't happy with Caleb Porter, and we know at times it's stale for him, and he moves on. I don't know if we are at that point right now. And this situation with letting in goals and therefore losing points at the end of games, that's not a physical thing. That is just a mental thing of, here we go again, and a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's very, very difficult to get out of it other than just going back to the well each and every time and finding a way to then say, all right, we're through it. But you just got the feeling that the Crew, from a player perspective on the team and probably from a fan perspective outside, just said, we've seen this movie before, and it's not going to end well. And it didn't. And that is a huge – first off, it's a huge point for Portland, but it's also a huge, brutal loss of points for the Crew and a bad look, again, for Caleb Porter, who is already on the hot seat. And I worry for him if he doesn't make the playoffs.
The Galaxy above the playoff line in the West, very impressive from them. 4-1 win over Colorado. All the goals were beautiful. 2 for Brugman, 1 from Raheem Edwards.
They put on a show, didn't they, huh?
Ricky Puig dishing out assists like Magic Johnson circa 1988. So the Galaxy coming together here at the right time. I think they're going to make it.
You do? Yeah, I mean, I think I had said that a while ago, and they do have that game in hand. And if they are playing like that, and you mentioned there was much more of a flow. There was much more, I think, of a purpose of play that you saw. And, when things are going well, they're going well. Chicharito, wonderful back heel, and who's the left back?
Raheem Edwards.
Raheem Edwards. Oh, my goodness. And, look, Raheem Edwards, sometimes I have no idea what he is doing out there on the soccer field, but in that moment, he scored a worldie. It was just incredible. So yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that the Galaxy right now, while not a great team, are a good enough team and have enough talent and are sitting in a position right now to get over the line. After that, we all know anything can happen, but again, it's not a great Galaxy team.
Shout out to Douglas Costa, who still found a way to get himself sent off from this game.
In a game that he's actually playing well. He has not had a great season, and he finally plays well, and then, it's bonehead type of move and gets kicked out. So
more positive on the Brazilian front was Brenner's performance for Cincinnati. 2-1 winners away to RSL. He scored both goals. Big. Very costly for RSL, who dropped below the playoff line in the West, and Cincinnati really solidifying their place above it in the East.
And, Pat Noonan and company and Chris Albright, the new leadership that has come in. I mean, considering they finished last the last 3 years, and now they're not only making the playoffs, but, unless something really goes wrong here the last couple of games and other stuff happens, they're going to finish comfortably into the playoffs. And this huge result going on the road, yeah. I mean, I'm starting to think about coaches of the year type of situations. And on one hand, you have someone like, first-year coach Steve Cherundolo, or a Jim Curtin who's doing more with less. And then you have somebody who's literally taken the worst team in the league and actually made them a contender. And so it's going to be interesting when I finally figure out who I'm going to vote for when it comes to Coach of the Year. But yes, congratulations to Cincinnati. I think they can have a playoff game, which is going to be fun.
Minnesota doing all they can to squander playoff berth. They lost to
They're backing in.
SKC 4-1, only 1 point in their last 5 games. I'll tell you, SKC eliminated, but they just ran out of time this season because since they added Agada, they've been a playoff caliber team. He got 2 goals in this one, so it's a shame that Peter Vermes and company dug such a big hole for themselves.
But this is my question. I appreciate that they reacted and obviously signed players, but had they not had the injuries, would they still be as good? I mean, was their hand forced to actually make themselves better than they would have been had everybody stayed healthy? I don't know. I mean, but yes, you're absolutely right. If the season was longer, it would have been fun to see how this would play out because they're playing free, and they're playing much better soccer than we have seen at all during the season.
And the Loons, as I mentioned, just clinging to a playoff spot right now.
Yeah, they're going to, the Loons are not flying high right now. So it'll be there. What the Loons are hoping is that when that switch of teams that are in and teams that are out, obviously that they're in, but that it's a new lease on life. It doesn't always work that way.
The stop-start nature of Seattle season continues. 2-1 loss to Vancouver. They're in real trouble here. Every time they have a good result, we think, okay, they might be back in business, and then they lose the next.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's up, down, up, down. They needed a run of games. They needed a 3-in-a-row type of situation. And I think we on the outside, and probably them on the inside, they always just assumed that it would come. And it never has clicked. And, there's a bigger conversation about ultimately how to view this Seattle season. And yes, you lose key players in the middle with, what's his name, Jean-Paulo, right? Jean-Paulo?
Yeah, lost him to injury
yes.
in the CCL final. Yeah.
And the young kid, too. So I get it, but injuries are part of the deal. And I know CCL is going to be used to kind of qualify everything here, but you had plenty of time to figure it out, and ultimately they haven't.
By the way, the Club World Cup might be in the United States.
Yes, I saw that. Hey, we'll take it. We love a tournament, and when I say we, I mean both the U.S. and Fox. So,
yeah. Orlando hammered Toronto 4-0. Toronto are done. Orlando hasn't mathematically clinched yet, but they're headed to the playoffs, which would be 3rd straight season under Oscar Pareja. Boy, he's really done a nice job.
And that's how you handle a hangover, okay? All right, not the Seattle year-long hangover from CCL. So Orlando wins the Open Cup. All right, fine, yeah, on the right, you lose a couple of games, whatever, and then you snap out of it, and you come back and you get a nice, comfortable win. So yeah, Oscar has done a good job, I would say.
And finally, Inter Miami 3-2 winners over DC United. The good part of the story, Gonzalo Higuain with a stoppage time winner, which vaults Inter Miami over Columbus and above the playoff line. Unfortunately, this match overshadowed by this incident where Taxi Fontas has been accused of racially abusing Damian Lowe. MLS is investigating. He denies it. But yeah, really ugly stuff. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have to let the investigation play out in this day and age, or any day and age. You want to make sure, because these are serious types of allegations, and you want to make sure that you are not, doing something that ends up not being true, and basically tainting a person. Having said that, if indeed this happened, there should be, immediate and forceful types of actions to make sure that the player understands how that's not ever going to be tolerated, and obviously send a message to everybody on the field and off the field that that's not something that's ever going to be tolerated, as long as it actually happened. And again, I wasn't there, nobody was there, and if proof is that this did happen, then the full weight of Major League Soccer should come down upon the player, and punishment should be meted out. When it comes to the competition and the actual game on the field and the result, huge, huge result for David Beckham's Inter Miami. And look, I did not think that the action from Phil Neville of, at a certain point, benching Gonzalo Higuain and sending that message to him and to his team and all through the league, I didn't think that it was going to have the results. And I don't think you can blame me and others, because Higuain does not strike me as the guy that takes things to heart and is able to be introspective and is able to change. And yet, that's kind of exactly what has happened. He took his medicine. This is from the outside. I have no idea. But I'm sure it wasn't easy. Nobody likes to have that happen. And this is a world-renowned star with incredible history and pedigree. And yet he took it like a man, and he came back, and he has just been phenomenal for this team. And so it's an amazing case study in dynamics and how you handle players and how you handle different players differently going forward. And I'd love to sit down with Neville and kind of pick his brain as to how he went through it, the pros and the cons of going it, and how it materialized on the other side with a better version of Higuain, and one that is, at this point, gotten the team into the playoffs. Still plenty of work to do right now. But again, keep in mind, this is in the context of a Miami team that cheated last year, was rightfully punished, and Chris Henderson came in and very, very quickly, plugged as many holes as he possibly could, and along with having faith in Neville, has righted the ship. And it's not easy, because they are still under restrictions that hurt them in terms of what they are able to do. So well done so far. Job is not accomplished, but huge win away at DC.
That is it.
That's it. All right. We're going to take a quick break, or are we going to? Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll head around the world, including over there in Europe. Should we do that?
Yep.
All right. Don't go away. All right. We're back. Should we take a little trip around the world here, and especially over there in Europe? Where do you want to start?
Let's start in Germany.
Oh, sehr gut. Okay.
Union Berlin 2, Wolfsburg 0. Jordan Pefok.
Who's that you say?
First goal with a nice header. Union Berlin atop the table. Jordan Pefok was the most notable omission from the U.S.'s most recent squad. A lot of people were angry about it, and they're even more angry after this weekend. Alexi, how could a guy scoring goals for the first-place team in the Bundesliga not be called up?
As I say each and every time, a national team is not a meritocracy. A national team is not about the best players. It is about the best collection of players. A national team is picked by humans with inherent biases and histories and baggage and all of that. And ultimately, a national team is made up of human beings making subjective decisions. But I will say this, a national team coach, in this case for the U.S., is ultimately judged by what happens in the World Cup. And so having that out there, and in particular for a position that we know is of need in that striker position, it is going to constantly be a source, and I think fairly so, of discussion as to why is he not with the national team. And I think there are legitimate reasons for Greg Berhalter to make. We can disagree with him. People out there can disagree with him. But again, they are subjective types of decisions. That he's scoring goals is great. Scored a wonderful goal, really wonderful timing, and then the ability to flick the ball into the side there. And so, this is a goal scorer in that number 9 position, albeit that plays the position maybe not in a way that Greg Berhalter, well, obviously not in a way that Berhalter likes, and it doesn't mean he's not going to be on the World Cup roster ultimately, but he's not there. It is going to be a source of discussion going forward. When we do the games, we're doing the Saudi Arabia game on Fox. Our friends over at ESPN are doing the Japan game. I guarantee it is going to be part of the narrative and part of what we're talking about. And that's okay, because we, as an American soccer playing nation, are now into this rarefied and new era where we actually have more players than can play on the field, and maybe more players than even can fit into a 26. And that brings discussion, that brings debate, and that brings criticism and disagreement. And that's okay. But congratulations to him going forward, and we'll see if the number 9s and the strikers of the U.S. men's national team respond in camp.
Union Berlin 5 points clear of Bayern, who lost 1-0 away to Augsburg. Bayern winless in their last 4 league games. It's been a strange start to the season for them. Julian Nagelsmann coming under some fire here.
Yeah, so 5th place now. But do you? I'm not. But are you even worried about Bayern? Like, is it? Oh, this is the end of days, and this is a real problem, and I'm really, really concerned with Bayern. I don't get the feeling that a lot of people are still that concerned with Bayern.
Obviously, if I was a betting man, I'd still think they win the Bundesliga. But I will say, I mentioned this at the start of the season, you take for granted having that center forward like Lewandowski scoring 30 goals a season and how many points that's worth. They don't have that, so they do feel slightly less imperious to me without having that guy up there. But I'm sure they'll figure it out.
But, I mean, you think that Union Berlin is going to continue doing what they're doing?
No, I mean, it would have to be Dortmund. That's the only team I could.
Which are 3 points behind.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I'm not worried about Bayern, but I like it. I'm here for it. I like the fact that there is this competition right now. I still don't get the sense of urgency or emergency when it comes to the way people are still looking about Bayern 7 games in.
Speaking of Dortmund, 1-0 winners over Schalke in the Revier Derby. 17-year-old Yusuf Moukoko with the second half winner, a nice header. Interesting day for Gio Reyna. He subbed on for an injured Marco Reus in the first half and then got subbed out late in the second half, but you were reasonably pleased with his performance?
In that he wasn't taken off on a stretcher or crying. Yeah, I mean, the bar's kind of low at this point. Yeah, I'm happy that he's playing. The question of Gio Reyna's talent has never been a question. We know he is arguably one of the most talented young players that we have seen and potentially a transformative generational type of player, but he can't stay healthy. And until he has a length of period where he is healthy, I'm always going to worry about it, even leading into the World Cup. Having said that, seeing him get on the field now and consistently do things, I think has been wonderful. There's a narrative out there now when it comes to Gio Reyna, though, about his body language. And this isn't something new. It's actually been talked of for a long time. The whole thing with body language, we try to read it from the outside, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody. Oh, this guy's a F you and his coach coming off the field. He's not shaking his hand or something like that, or he looked this way, or, he rolled his eyes, and we have cameras now everywhere that document every move and every word that is said. When it comes to Gio Reyna's body language, there's a difference between a body not pressing or giving up on a play and a player throwing his hands up in disgust or, F you and his coach or something like that. Those are very different things in terms of body movement. Body language is somebody doing something that you are interpreting and thinking that they are saying or thinking something that actually isn't being said. He's young. I don't care, honestly, what his body language does or doesn't say to you, me, or anybody else out there. All I care about is that his body is healthy, and right now his body is healthy. Will it turn fans off sometimes, the things that he does? Yeah. Will it turn his coach off or his players? Yeah. But there's an inherent risk in doing those types of things. But again, this is also a young man who, for the most part, has been in a bubble of soccer and probably will be for the rest of his career and maybe even the rest of his life. And so some of the ability to read signs or decide what hills to die on and decide how everything that you do and things that you say and things that you do and the way that you act and the way that you react can have an effect in terms of your success or how people view you. I mean, sometimes that takes a little while to figure out. And I would think that it would be even more difficult if you have been in this incubator and in this warm type of cocoon of soccer, which he has been from a very early age.
Marco Reus, by the way, it sounds like not as bad as initially feared. He's going to miss some time, but should be back for the World Cup, which is good news. Good.
Because we're worried, and then we're doing pictures for him and all that. So good.
I mentioned Jordan Pefok not getting called up. I think Ricardo Pepi essentially got his spot. Pepi enjoying a good start to life at Groningen. He got an assist in his first game, and then this past weekend gets a goal in a 2-1 loss to Sparta Rotterdam. Pepi's first goal for club or country since October 7, 2021. It was almost a year.
And, the reaction, while I guess nice that everyone is so supportive of Ricardo Pepi, the desperation of, wanting him to do well, and therefore, I don't know, justifying some sort of notion that you have. Just as I say the national team is not a meritocracy, the national team is also not a charity. And so him scoring, is it good? Yeah. He's doing what he is supposed to do, albeit in a lower level. And I'm not here to downplay or poo-poo it, but you also have to watch the goals that he's scoring. He scored a nice header goal. It'd be nice if the defender jumped and tried to even challenge him on that. And he would not be the first attacking player to go to the Dutch league and to score a bunch of goals and use that to propel himself going forward. But that was the whole plan. So let's not break our arms patting him on the back for doing what he is actually supposed to do. And I know he hasn't done it in almost a year, and that's great. But there does seem to be a complete bending over backwards to make this work. And I just hope that it's not forcing something that doesn't necessarily have to be.
There was a Brazilian striker, Alfonso Alves, who once scored 7 goals in an Eredivisie match. And that was the day I stopped taking the Dutch league seriously, because that guy was garbage.
Michael Bradley scored a bunch of goals over there in Holland. So, and it doesn't mean that it can't fill you with confidence, obviously, and it doesn't mean that Ricardo Pepi isn't getting on that plane to go to the national team. He's there right now as we're speaking, and that goal doesn't help him. But it's just interesting and amazing to me that we are grasping on to anything when it comes to Ricardo Pepi.
Before we move on to other leagues, let's do some U.S. roster news, because 3 players that Greg Berhalter called up have dropped out due to injury. Yunus Musa, Cameron Carter-Vickers, and Chris Richards. They've been replaced by your boy Johnny Cardoso, who's playing very well with Internacional in the Brasileirão right now. They play later today against Atletico Goianiense.
I can't quit you, Johnny. I can't quit you.
And then the 2 center backs called up, Mark McKenzie and Eric Palmer-Brown. Eric Palmer-Brown, you might recall, plays for Ligue 1 side
Troyes, yeah. And this is an important thing, because obviously injuries happen and things happen as we go through, and next man up is going to be important. We all constantly are debating, this is how the 11 should be. But we all recognize that that's the best laid plans and the perfect world type of scenario, and things are going to happen where we are going to have to see changes. I mean, I don't want players to be hurt, but this window, for example, with Robinson out on that left side, and we're going to have to see what's going on. The Chris Richards thing is not good for Chris Richards. I know a lot of people kind of have him penciled in as one of the center backs going forward, but you gotta deal with these with these things. And again, Greg Berhalter bringing in players that he has seen before, and I think again it just goes back to he's going to dance with the ones that brought him.
Checking in on a couple of Americans in Serie A, Juventus suffer a humiliating 1-0 defeat away to newly promoted Monza. Monza's first ever Serie A victory, and it comes at the expense of the old lady. They're the club owned by Silvio Berlusconi. So Allegri in all sorts of trouble there. Di Maria got sent off in the first half of this game. McKinney played better than he has in recent games, but still, he's on a team that's in a major crisis.
Yeah, but if you're going to be on a crappy Juventus team, be the best player on the crappy Juventus team. And Weston McKennie at this point, continues to kind of be that. It's not good from a results perspective, them sitting mid-table, and there's the dreaded vote of confidence for Allegri, and this is a long-term process, and blah 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 blah. But at a certain point, you're Juventus. You gotta do the things to get you back to where you kind of belong and where you expect to be. More importantly, so yeah, this is. I mean, most people have never even heard of Monza.
The big one in Italy this weekend, Napoli go to the San Siro, and they beat AC Milan 2-1 to continue their great start to the season. They're level on points with Atalanta, top the table. Bit of a disaster for Serginho Dest. He came on at halftime for David Calabria, who was suffering from muscle fatigue, and Dest had a really poor second half. The fans were all over him. He committed a clumsy penalty on Varaskelia. Politano converted 1-0, and then Giroud equalized. But then Giovanni Simeone with a beautiful header. Napoli takes it 2-1.
Dest has always been an interesting cat, right? I mean, there's undeniable talent, undeniable physical and technical skill, and yet you get the. I mean, I think you should appreciate him because there's a Brazilian part of him. I feel like where he operates on a not just a different plane, but one that we can't even fathom and understand. And there's some Brazilians, even some outside backs in the past that will do incredible things, and then they'll just do bonehead things. And I get the feeling there's a little bit of that when it comes to Serginho Dest, and yet it doesn't register for him that he has done anything out of the ordinary, or that maybe he shouldn't do that, or should try to do that. I guess what I'm saying is, you take the good with the bad because the good still far outweighs the bad, but you're going to have those moments of bad, and he's still obviously betting in with a new team, a new league, a new culture. But that's not a good thing. I'm not sure that he gets fazed by any of that. So people booing or him not having a good game, I think he just kind of goes back and does his thing and forgets very easily.
He's got a little Marcelo.
There we go. Exactly. Right?
Marcelo, who was dubbed a false left back.
Right.
That was the best description of her. I mentioned Giovanni Simeone scoring. His dad was involved in the big game in Spain, Atletico Madrid hosting Real Madrid. Unfortunately, racism a bit of a theme on today's podcast because this match occurred against the backdrop of this controversy involving Vinicius Jr. This has been building for weeks. There's been criticism in Spain over Vinicius' showboating and the way he celebrates his goals, but it took a really ugly turn this past week when on a Spanish show, the guest, who I guess is an agent, said that Vinicius needs to stop monkeying around. So it became a really racial controversy. I mean, some would argue that was always the subtext, but it became front and center. Everybody from Neymar to Pele to P. Diddy chimed in on social media defending Vinicius. And sure enough, the Atletico Madrid fans racially abused him before and during the match, which was really some ugly scenes there. He did get the last laugh because Real Madrid won 2-1. His fellow Brazilian Rodrigo scored a beautiful opener, and then him and Vinicius danced in the corner flag right in front of the Atletico fans. And then Vinicius played a part in the second goal. Lovely 1-2 with Modric. Invades the area, takes a shot that hit the post, came back. Valverde slams home the rebound. So it was 2-0 at that point. Hermoso pulled one back late, but still Real Madrid take it 2-1 to continue their perfect start to the season. But what did you make of the whole?
Yeah. So look, the comments from the agent, that is going to, that is fire, right? And so you should know better than to do something like that, and it's despicable and disgusting, right? As were the actions outside of the stadium by the crowd. And look, I understand that there's individuals may do things different when they are alone and do and say things different when they are alone relative to being in a group, and there is comfort oftentimes in a group situation, mob mentality. We all understand that, but this is why you individually have to be strong within a group. And I tell kids, we tell everybody all the time, because there is going to be a point where it's easier to go along. It's easier just to do what everybody else is doing. And in that moment, that's when you have to be strong. And, this was a group that obviously from a group perspective felt that was appropriate before the game. And it was discussing, obviously not appropriate. And yet I would wonder individually, would they have, the audacity to be able to do that? And I'm not sure that they would. And it doesn't make it right, or that something like that would happen individually or collectively. Ultimately, it is all wrong. And so I love the fact that Vinicius it's not that he's not affected. Everybody's affected, I would think, if something horrible like that happens, but that he throws it back in the face. And, if you don't like the dancing of a player, the surest way to get them to continue to do that is to do what you're doing. Because if I'm Vinicius, and it sounds like that's what he's doing, he's going, you. Okay, I'm going to win. I am going to score. I'm going to dance. And even if in the past I was even considering tamping it down, hell no, I'm doubling down. So I love that moment right back in the face of of disgusting displays.
Two soccer notes on this one. Griezmann started for Atletico. Remember, they've been trying to keep his minutes down because they don't want to trigger that permanent buy clause. But Simeone felt like this was an important enough game where the heck with that. We're going to play him from the start. And number two, I'm ready to say it. Tchouaméni is an upgrade over Casemiro. And I'm a Brazilian and I'm saying that. But another stroke of genius from Real Madrid to get the money they got for Casemiro at his age, going to United, and then buying Tchouaméni, who is a fantastic player. Rodrigo's goal was a beautiful assist by Tchouaméni. He is such a good player. I think he's going to be starting for France at the World Cup.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Premier League, the two games we would have been talking about the most, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester United, Leeds, were postponed because of the funeral of the Queen. So one game really worth mentioning, Arsenal 3-0 winners away to Brentford. Gabriel Jesus among the scores, and then he did a Vinicius dance, kind of tribute to him, which was fun to see. This vaults Arsenal back to the top of the table. They're 1 point ahead of both City and Tottenham, who also won this weekend. City beat Wolves 3-0. Erling Haaland, surprise, with a goal. And Tottenham beat Leicester 6-2. Heung-min Son came on in the second half and scored a hat-trick, 3 goals in a 13-minute span. There's some big Premier League games on the other side of the international break to look forward to. Arsenal, Tottenham, City United. So the Premier League is going to start percolating again.
I mean, I don't think that it's wrong for us or anybody to be impressed and bullish about what this Arsenal team is here. But as such, they're still ultimately going to be judged against the big boys out there. And so they have Spurs coming up, right, in next weekend, right?
After the international
After the international break. So that'll be fun. I mean, we saw them in their only loss, right, to Manchester United. So that's ultimately where I think we can judge Arsenal. But so far, so good.
Arsenal, late in this one, brought on Ethan Nwaneri.
15 years old, right? My goodness.
181 days, the youngest player in Premier League history, youngest player in English top flight history. What do you suppose Sean Sullivan was doing at the age of 15?
Not going on the field for Arsenal, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What were you doing at 15? Not going on the field for Arsenal.
I'm doing today, sadly.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on this kid, but that is 15 years old.
But so there's an example of Arteta. Look, you're leading the league. And, there's still some questions about depth when it comes to Arsenal and, what happens when you get down and dirty and, you're slogging through the festive season or whatever they're talking about that. Do you have enough? And that he has the confidence in what's coming up behind to throw these players in. And maybe it's just completely out of necessity, but that's the type of balance that you need, where you're not just doing it because that's all you can do. You're doing it because you have the luxury, because the team is so good, to be able to give these moments in the appropriate moments.
Two more games and then we're done. PSG 1-0 winners away to Lyon. Are you familiar with a guy named Lionel Messi?
I've heard of him. Did he have a good game?
He scored a lovely goal assisted by Neymar. So those two, their chemistry.
They're both playing together?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So PSG continued to roll in France. And finally, we end in Mexico. Club America, 2-1 winners over Chivas at the Azteca in the latest edition of the Super Clásico. This was a shocking omission from your top 5 rivalries in the world list.
I know.
So you think Seattle-Portland is a bigger rivalry?
Yes, absolutely.
Chivas.
Yeah.
America's second goal scored by Alejandro Zendejas.
Now, we've heard of him.
We
got some history with him.
Yeah, he's been in the news a lot lately. He's a guy who's eligible for both the U.S. and Mexico, played for the U.S. at youth level, buddies with Christian Pulisic, but has spent the last several years in Liga MX and has really blossomed into a star with America. He's now considered one of the best players in Liga MX. And so everyone assumed that must mean he's trending towards Mexico. Tata Martino wanted to call him up recently, but he wanted him to declare once and for all for Mexico. And reportedly, he said he would only do it if he was guaranteed a World Cup spot. And Tata wasn't willing to do that, so he ended up not calling him up. There were some hurt feelings there. And then there was talk of Berhalter calling him up. Christian Pulisic was reportedly pushing for it, but Berhalter didn't call him up either. So he's kind of in limbo right now, Zendejas. But yeah, I mean, this has been a big story in Mexico. Herculez Gomez has been all over it. Kind of a interesting situation. Huh?
I mean, we've been through this before, okay, where you have a player come of age and this tug of war, and it's not going to be the last time. As a matter of fact, I think it's only going to increase. Keep in mind, again, this is, by the way, another FC Dallas product. Born in Mexico, then grew up in Texas, and so out of that wonderful system that they have over there at FC Dallas, and now he's at the point where there's the potential for call-ups. And again, part of me loves it and gets excited about this because it proves quality that exists out there. There's also proof of concept when it comes to the youth development that goes on. But also there's a part of me that worries that we start to get to the point on both sides, whether it's the Mexican side or the U.S. side, where we start just protecting them to protect them and not recognizing, if you're just, keeping powder dry for later, that's fine. But if later never comes, I worry about that. And that's where players have to be honest with themselves, and federations, in this case it would be federations, have to be honest with the player. And you can say, well, it's not their responsibility. They need to, get the best possible talent and cover their bets and hedge everything with the decisions that they make. But, man, oh man, he's scoring goals and he's a good player, but that doesn't necessarily, again, mean that from a U.S. perspective that we have to protect him and he has to play for the U.S.
American first place in the Liga MX standings, while Chivas are headed for the repechaje.
Oh, I love when you say that. Anything else, my friend?
That's it.
Okay, let's take another quick break, and when we come back, it's time for Ask Alexi. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we're back, and it's time for that part of the show, the Ask Alexi part. You know it. You love it. You know it. You use that hashtag Ask Alexi. You send us your questions, your comments, concerns out there on social media. And we have a fully functioning State of the Union podcast hotline. Remember, it's 657-549-2297, 657-549-2297. We're getting a lot of calls nowadays, which is wonderful. We love the fact that you're willing to put yourself out there and actually lend your voice out there. And keep in mind, if you are doing social media, all of the handles out there, SOTU with Alexi, at SOTU with Alexi. Mossy, what do the people want to know this week on this episode?
Well, as you mentioned, the hotline is popping. We have 2 voicemails. Let's go to the first one.
Hi, this is Ben from Fort Collins, Colorado. With seeing all the highlight videos from Gabriel Slonina and the fact that he signed with Chelsea, I'm just curious why he's not more involved in the discussion of goalkeeper coming up to this World Cup. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, Ben from Fort Collins. I appreciate the question. Thank you for calling in on that hotline. Gaga Slonina, right? He is a wonderkid. He is an obvious talent, and which is evidenced by Chelsea snapping him up, and he's played well. Having said that, he is still a young talent. I still don't see him, and I'm not surprised that the talk has not been about him relative to 2022. I think absolutely 2026, but I think in particular because he's a goalkeeper and because we have good goalkeepers and more experienced goalkeepers, and I do think that experience in all positions is important, not always necessary, but I do think in a goalkeeper position it's necessary, and it would worry me, as good as he is and as talented as he is, if he were in goal for the U.S. men's national team. Now, you have many times talked about the Brazilian phenomenon of taking a player to kind of blood them and just have them be around the team. Again, this isn't a player who has ever been in that dynamic with Greg Berhalter that we know he talks about so much. So I also think that it doesn't quite work for someone like him that would just be kind of like this interloper at the last minute coming in, and a young, very, very young, inexperienced player who is not ultimately going to play, and he's not ultimately going to make your team better in the moment, which is Greg Berhalter's responsibility. So I just see him as 26 as opposed to 22. What about you?
I would consider him as the third string, as you mentioned, just for the experience. I mean, if it's going to be a Horvath or Sean Johnson, I almost think take Slonina just for the experience.
Really?
With an eye towards 26.
I don't think. I go back to the dynamic. I'm not opposed to having a young, inexperienced player, but I go back to the dynamic of this team that I know Greg Berhalter obviously values highly. And I worry about, not that he's a cancer or anything like that, but I just worry about putting him into something like that. But Ben from Fort Collins, don't worry about Gaga. He's got a very bright future, and knock on wood, he stays healthy. We know that, speaking of staying healthy, Zach Steffen right now, there's not only a question as to whether he is going to be in goal as the number one for the U.S. men's national team. I think that ship is kind of sailing away now with his injuries. But there's a question, even if he's going to be healthy enough to be one of the three when it comes to going to Qatar. But even if he is not, for example, I still don't see anybody being that third goalkeeper other than Horvath or Sean Johnson. And I think it's going to be Sean Johnson, ultimately, if everybody is healthy. What do we got? We got some more, right?
We have another voicemail.
Hey, Alexi, this is Jared Brown from Orlando, and I just want to tell you how much I love you, brother.
Is this a joke? Is this a trick? My goodness. That's direct. That is to the point. That warms the cockles of my American redheaded heart to hear that. I am not related to Jared Brown from Orlando. The potential exists that this is tongue-in-cheek, facetious, but I choose, Mossy, to believe in the best in people. I choose to believe in the light. I choose to believe in laughter and joy and positivity. And so therefore, I choose to believe that Jared Brown is genuinely calling to express his incredible love for yours truly. I will accept that love, and I will bring it back twofold to you, my friend. So, Jared Brown from Orlando, I am just telling you right now how much I love you. And thank you so much for that message. As I said, it makes me feel incredibly happy. You jealous?
If you went by Twitter, you would think that you're the most hated man in America.
You would?
But I have to say, I've traveled with you for work many times, hung out in lobbies of hotels, having beers and such, and I've never seen an unpleasant interaction in person. Everybody that comes up always loves you. Can we get a picture? You're my favorite. So it is interesting, this contrast between Twitter and the real world.
Well, we know that Twitter is not the real world. It is a wonderful video game and should be treated as such. That's very nice of you to say. Look, I am sure I have my detractors out. Well, I know I have my detractors out there, and I'm sure that there are detractors out there that if given the opportunity one-on-one would tell me how horrible I am and how much they think I'm horrible. But it is few and far between. I'm not saying it's never happened. There certainly have been. I actually appreciate if and when somebody comes up and disagrees with me in a respectful and civil way, even vehemently disagrees with me and thinks that I'm off my rocker and crazy about something that I'm saying, or really, really is disappointed even in something that I've said. That's okay. You can certainly have that, but it comes with the territory.
I didn't want to mention this at the time because I thought it would sound a little douchey, but I'll mention it here. A couple of weeks ago, I was hanging out at a coffee shop near my apartment, and some guy did come up to me, recognized me from the video, said, "Hey, are you David Mossy? Oh, I'm a big fan of the pod," and we chatted for a couple of
Really?
minutes. Yeah. So.
See, that's cool. That's cool. Listen, we are all a bunch of egomaniacs, and egotistical narcissists when it comes to the industry that we're in. Having said that, yeah, it's nice to know that you are resonating. It's nice to know that people care. And in general, whether you're on television or in the media or not, it's nice to know that people appreciate what you do, Mossy. I appreciate what you do. I'm glad that you have moments like that. I know you don't need them because you are much more fulfilled and content with yourself as opposed to the shell that I am that is in constant need of adulation and reaffirming of my ability and my belief in my talent. Well, that's cool. Anything else you want to go here? We'll just get those two. That was cool. We had not heard that beforehand from Jared, but I do appreciate if there is any love out there, whether it's real or not. I'm gonna choose to believe that it is real. All right. Should we take another quick break?
Let's do
All right, one more quick break. We'll come back at the end of the show, and I'll give you my one for the road. All right, welcome back. It's the end of our show, and at the end of each and every show, I give you my one for the road. We are coming to what is kind of the end of the road for this U.S. men's national team cycle. And as we know, there is a international window upon us, which features not just the last camp when these players will be getting together, but also the last games with these two games. And I hearken back to a time long ago, back in what I affectionately refer to as the 1900s, back in the mid-1990s, when I was preparing for the World Cup in 1994. It was a very different scenario, but there were some similarities, including this understanding that there was going to come a point when the roster was going to be announced, and you were either in or you weren't. And there is for lack of a better word, a ruthlessness that I think is essential to anybody that is successful in sports or probably anything in life. And it's not always at the expense of others, but there is an element of looking at your situation and pushing aside others. And I will never forget the moment when the national team that was going to represent the U.S. in the World Cup in 1994 was announced. And I think I've told you about it before, but it bears repeating. We were in a parking lot. We were in a parking lot in Laguna Niguel, California. And for many of us, it had been the end of a very long process, in the same way that this cycle will come to a conclusion. And all of those experiences, all of those interactions that we have had, all of those ups and downs are put into a calculation, again, for a human being with all of those, biases that we talk about and all of that baggage and history, and shaken up and spit out in terms of a result. And I remember being in that parking lot, and you went one way or the other. One way, coach needs to see you. Other way, coach doesn't need to see you. If you went and the coach needed to see you, that was not a good thing, because it was, the thing in your locker, baseball, all that kind of stuff. And every athlete goes through different versions of this. And I'll never forget driving home from that parking lot, knowing that I was going to be on the final roster, and the culmination of now multiple years. And I had and this is going to sound harsh, but I had very little sympathy or empathy towards others. And maybe that is a selfish way, or as I said, a ruthless way of looking at it. But I'm just trying to give you a look into the mind. It's not that I couldn't see that they, weren't going to have this moment, and that was going to be painful and sad and something that they would hold on. But it was me against them. And while we were friends, while we were teammates, while we supported each other, ultimately there was a competition going on. And to come out on top, that was the goal. It was always the goal. And this last camp now coming up for these players, there are plenty of them that are going to be involved that know they are going to be on the plane to Qatar. I was not in a position to know that that was necessarily going to happen. And until it actually happens, even for players that you would think should know that they're going to be, until it actually happens, sometimes it doesn't register, especially if it's your first time. And for most of these players, almost all of these players, it will be their first time going to a World Cup, as we've said time and time again, coming off of the immense failure that was 1998. And there is nothing like it when that finally happens. And there will be a separation, and it's winners and losers, not losers like in the, you're a loser, but winners and losers in that the winning part of it is you're going to the World Cup, and the losing part of it is you're losing out on the opportunity. And that's what the World Cup ultimately is. And so when you're watching these players that have been lucky enough to be called in, playing for their future, playing for the seat on the plane. Look for that ruthlessness. Look for the players that are saying, I am going to do whatever it takes, regardless of what has happened in the past, and maybe that's all part of it, but ultimately, this might be my final chance to prove that I deserve to be on this team, that I deserve to represent the greatest country in the world and go to Qatar and to be involved in this World Cup that could potentially change my life forever. And we will see ultimately in the games, but it's done every single moment, every single training session, every single interaction that you have in camp could be the thing. And I'll leave you with this. In 1994, I've been told this story before. Joe Max Moore, you know Joe Max Moore? Okay.
Mr. Clutch.
Yep, Mr. Clutch, right? He was right on the edge of going to the World Cup. And Bora Milutinovic, our coach, loved to play soccer tennis. And literally a day or so before Bora had to have the final roster in, he was playing soccer tennis with Joe Max Moore. And Joe Max Moore is the most competitive player I ever met. They are playing soccer tennis. Joe was just dying to beat anybody, including the head coach. And years later, Bora told me that in that moment, watching Joe Max Moore, he said, I am going to bring Joe Max Moore to the World Cup, because how could I possibly not have somebody on my team that wants nothing more than to win? And yeah, you know, there might be distance between other players, but this was yes or no. It was right on the edge, right on the border right there. And that's what tipped him off. So you never know what it is. Something that you do, something that you say, obviously something that you kick in this instance, the attitude that you have, the spirit that you show, the personality that you show, the heart that you show. You never know if that's going to be ultimately what, again, the human being, in this case, Greg Berhalter, is going to decide that tips you over and gets you on that team and gets you on that plane. I love it. Can't wait to see it. Anything else, Mossy?
I'll just say the thing I'm most looking forward to is those last European club games a week before the World Cup, when the squads have already been announced. I think you're going to see a lot of guys pulling out of challenges. And
yes.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
Well, we all, you know, with this international window coming up, and we will be covering it all, as we've said before, it gives us a great glimpse into a lot of these teams that we are going to be covering. And so I can't wait to check out those games. We have Nation League coming up. Obviously, the men's national team games coming up. But everybody is playing right now. And so for those of us like you and myself and others that are trying to get as much research and information as possible, we will be eating up all of these different games that are coming in.
Absolutely.
Anything else? All right, keep reviewing and writing and subscribing. Thank you. Thank you also to the men and women that were able to put this together. We are, like we said, not in our normal studio, but they didn't miss a beat. And looks great. It sounds great. Hope it looks great and sounds great at home. We will be here for another show, and then we'll be back in our regular studio going forward. But until then, keep reviewing, keep rating, keep subscribing, keep downloading, keep clicking, keep sending us your message, whether it is on the social media platforms or obviously on our State of the Union podcast hotline. Again, it's 657-549-2297. Do all of those different things. And we really, really appreciate that you spend any time with us. Again, coming at you 2 times a week now on the State of the Union. We'll talk to you later on this week. And until then, and as always, size the day.